Yeah, Chris is just clout chasing over here.
Yep. That's right.
So.
Chasing clouts.
All right, I gotta turn
Old
these
man
up.
yelling at clout.
God, how do the levels change so much
Like-
every fucking time, man?
Yeah, it's
I don't
like
get
they
it.
could probably bury ears right now.
Do. But the thing is, like when we
Monitor.
get really loud, like the dynamic
That's like-
range on these things is it's crazy.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I
Oh, that
always
was
there's
pretty
always
quiet.
some section I have to like turn down and do a clip fix on.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think these levels look okay though.
Yeah, I was just blabbing about this protein shake I was having, and then like how I was like hitting it hard lately, and then at the gym, and then like this week in particular, I didn't realize like how much I was working at the gym, and like I was just catching up to my old levels, and like
Oh yeah, I know
really,
exactly what you mean.
you know, whatever. But it's kind of like if a musician hasn't played their music in a while,
Right.
and then they pick up the instrument and they're like, "Fuck, I'm rusty."
Yeah.
So then, like, but to somebody who is less maybe trained or something, they're like, "Well, you sounded fine to me."
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So the musician's like, "No fucking way." Like I'm not quite
Right.
there. So that's kind of how I feel like in the gym right now. And this last week, I've been really like hitting it, and realized I was like, and I'm sure some of the listeners who are fairly active like know how this goes sometimes, where like you just like you finish and you feel great, and then like an hour later you're like, all I want to do is like eat and then sleep.
Yeah.
You know, and then you feel the same way the next day and the next day and the next day. And people were saying, "Oh well, you know, it's because you're fucking in your 30s now." And I'm like, "Well, it's not. That's actually not really how that works. If you're sustaining
Yeah.
a level of activity, like
Right.
you're gonna be a little more tired than when you're like fucking 18. But like,
Yeah.
it's not like if you're in shape.
It's like a
decent
car.
shape-
Like I had a neighbor who's really into cars, and I
Yeah.
was like, oh yeah, I don't know how much longer my car is gonna last because
Right.
it's got like 180,000 miles on it.
Yeah.
He's like, dude, the mileage doesn't matter. It's
Yeah.
like all
It's all
how well
maintenance
you
and-
take care of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like your body. And I was just saying how there was literally a BBC article out the other day that was talking about how sustained like physical discipline of whatever kind you choose, fitness in general, whether you're lifting or running or fucking doing yoga or swimming or biking or, you know, just doing 100 push-ups a day, whatever
Yeah.
the fuck you're doing, right? Has great effects on like your immune system, your aging process, like your like clarity. And one of the researchers is actually this dude who's like, he's like in his 70s, and they said that he has the immune system of like a 20-year-old.
Yeah, damn.
Right. And I was like, those are my goals, basically, is to be like, you know, like the cranky old fart who can still fucking push a police car over in the street. You know?
Yeah. I did some exercise this week. Let's see, I did 10 bicep curls,
Nice. Just the one arm.
and then that's it.
Yeah.
Both arms.
Oh, okay. You did that. That's good. I mean, I can show you some shit. I can help you.
I just
Let
like
me
I
help
just don't
you.
do anything. That's
Yeah,
the main
yeah.
issue. It's like even if I knew like
Mhm.
how to do stuff correctly or whatever.
Yeah.
Which like I can do a push up correctly.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
about it.
a lot of it really is just like training on the technique, because then that equips you if you like realize you want to do better.
Yeah.
Then like realizing you want to do better and then not knowing how to do better
Uh-huh.
is like that seems to be one of the huge barriers for most people, right? Because they're like, oh, I really wish I was in better shape, but like, well, while they have the impetus and the mood to do it, they don't know where to start, so they don't do
Right.
it, and then it carries on into, you know, ad infinitum.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then once you do have training, like I said, like I slacked off this winter because I was so stressed out, and like some of you might have noticed how fucked up I was for a while. And thank you for all your help all over again. But like that has a toll on your physical health as well.
Yeah.
You know, and also like really fucks with your ability to stick to a regimen because you're depressed, you're anxious, you're freaking out.
Yeah, I have no idea what that's like at all.
Yeah, right. Yeah, none of us do, obviously. Right. I'm the only one.
I'm
who's
like
ever
I'm like
suffered.
just getting back into like actually cooking meals for myself and not just like
Oh, yeah.
depressingly like eating frozen food all the time
Totally,
and
yeah.
shit.
And that makes a difference too. It's
Yeah.
like getting like whole foods if you can.
Yeah.
Um,
I tried to make mapo tofu this week.
Oh yeah.
What I made turned out really well, but it was not mapo tofu
Uh,
because I got black bean paste instead of broad bean paste.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I've been making tempeh lately.
okay,
Have you
been
had
making
tempeh?
it,
Yeah.
or like cooking it.
The cooking it, I mean.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I want to learn how to make it. That'd be fucking fantastic.
I have a book that can
But I
tell
feel
you how to
like
make it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's Sandra
gotta send
Katz's
me that
book,
shit.
The Art of Fermentation. It's a
Yeah.
good book.
Yeah, I was funny,
Propaganda makes fun of him. They have like a song called "The Flensing of Sandor Cats." But yeah, the book's good. It has like it's a really interesting style because instead of giving you like recipes like this amount of this and this amount of this and
Right.
you do this, this and this,
Right.
he gives you like the general idea of like, okay, if you want to make tempeh, like here are the requirements for it and the steps you'd have to go through,
Nice.
and here's how it's traditionally made, and here's how you could make it like in a modern way or whatever. And he like there's like pictures and stuff. It's a good book.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting, and like it's actually really relevant to my interests. Hilarious enough to say, because I was talking to some people at the cafe a few weeks ago, and I was like, yeah, I'm really interested in becoming whatever you call it, a culturist, a fermenter.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, how do you make mead? How do you brew various things? How do you actually ferment tea in a particular way to make different kinds of tea? How do you make cheese? How do you make yogurt? How do you make tempeh? You know, there's so and like
I've made inroads
and also
into
like pickling,
this whole
preserving
thing.
things too. Yeah.
I make kimchi fairly often.
Oh hell yeah. Yeah.
My last attempt did not turn out well. I think I didn't put enough tannin in it.
Oh okay.
You have to put tannin in it to get it to stay crispy.
Yeah.
And so like it was good for like a couple weeks, and then I tried it recently, like a couple weeks ago, and it was just like soft and gross and inedible.
Yeah.
So,
well, you live, you learn, or you poison yourself and die.
yeah, I should ask my neighbors for advice because they have like if you have any Asian neighbors. You can tell if they make kimchi because they'll have giant strainers on their, usually in their back deck.
Yep.
Because they're too big to keep
like
in the
a whole
house.
process to do it.
And so I'll see my neighbor Pak outside like washing cabbage leaves around kimjang.
Nice.
So
Yeah. And also like typically giant containers of some
oh
kind
yeah,
to like
big
keep it
giant
all in.
boxes of cabbage.
Yep.
On recycling day.
Yeah.
It'll look like soggy.
Yeah. Right. Good place to hide your baggies. And speaking of baggies, we're going to talk about
Stimulants today.
Stimulants. Hell yeah.
So I'll just keep that whole thing in, I guess.
Might as well. That's our little intro.
Yeah,
our
so
little theme song.
welcome to Neighbor Science, the only
Hey.
podcast about political economy and anime. I'm Ryan Salisbury.
I'm Chris Nivens.
Yep. And so Chris had an idea for an episode, and it's basically like
Has nothing to do with my interests.
the sort of history and political economy of stimulants and how stimulants are used. For some reason, we got our wires crossed, and so like I thought he meant like ancient and medieval.
I was vague.
Stuff. Yeah. So like I did a bunch of research
He
into
knows
that.
that
And I
I'm
was like, man, there's
esoteric,
not a
so-
whole lot of stuff I can find here. Is it like, are we really focusing on like that stuff, or and Chris was just like, no, like whatever,
We can
man,
do whatever.
Like,
Yeah.
So
we settled on what?
Got a
Kind
grab
of a
bag of stuff. I
grab
unfortunately did not do. I just really didn't do enough research, but
It's fine. We're just gonna job out.
yeah. So we
anyway.
might talk about some other stuff if we
Yeah.
run out of things to talk about with respect to
Sounds
stimulants.
good to me. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and get started. So I tried to look at the prehistory, and there's just not a ton of stuff. I mean, how would they really know? Like, they could see, like, oh yeah,
Like
people did use
cultivation or
certain things, and that's about it.
Because like I feel like it'd be really hard to tell. Besides, like if they managed with some of these like old mummies and stuff, like what's his name? Oh God, I can't remember. I can't believe I can't.
Like, I know
remember.
the reason that anthropologists and archaeologists know that about like how far marijuana use goes back.
Yeah.
is because they've found like charred seeds.
Right, you can find like artifact. Yeah,
It's like, oh, okay, so they were smoking weed in India like 4,000 years ago.
Yeah. Hell yeah,
Cool.
Right, true center.
Oh,
of
which
civilization.
one thing I learned, I think it was T was talking about how the word ganja is an Indian word, and the reason they call it ganja in Jamaica is because like once African slavery was ended, they switched to Indian slavery.
Right, that's right.
And so in Jamaica and Trinidad and Haiti, probably, all those Caribbean countries, there's large Indian populations. And so the Indians brought weed smoking to Jamaica. And so they brought the word for it as well.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Tea. And that's the tea.
Yes, that is the tea. And that is also the segue to,
We're gonna
to
kick
the
off
tea
with
section. Yeah. So I'm a big tea guy. Despite that, I did the least reading on tea out of all the stuff that we have in here.
Saved
probably.
your ass.
Yeah. So tea, I know tea originated in Indochina, Southeast Asia. Chris wrote here the oldest tea tree in the world currently is 3,200 years old.
Pretty fucking.
You can still get tea from that tree.
Yeah, I assume so.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one that particular tree would be, but I know there's trees that are like 1,800 plus years old. You can go to Wegmans.
Really good.
Go to Wegmans and get Rishi tea.
Oh yeah,
and the ones that are in the black tins, they might have changed the style, but it'll say ancient tree on there, and they use the like 1,300-year-old trees for that shit.
I gotta get some of that stuff.
So like some of the Dragon Well tea, Lung Qing, I think is the Chinese name.
Okay.
And then I think some of the black teas they make from those ancient trees as well.
Okay.
I mean, you can't really tell that it's like that old of a tree. It's just like one of those things. It's like, wow, cool.
Yeah,
like
it's kind of a cool novelty or rarity.
I'm
and
drinking an ancient life form's like offspring,
life
sort of.
Force.
Life force.
I'm inharing the qualities.
It's chachi, as
early Chinese literacy.
Chinese people would say.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess like a couple facts that I could spout off. Well, one you have here is the Yunnan province is the birthplace of tea. So Yunnan has like some really great black teas, especially golden Yunnan tea is like a really great. It's like a golden tippy black tea. So it tastes a lot different than the usual black tea that you'd be used to here if you got it in a bag. It's like it looks like I don't know, like curled up, like dried flower petals, like rolled up, dried flowers rolled up or something like that. And it's a very different taste and everything. And I went to a tea shop in New York when me and Diane went there last summer, and so I was reading some stuff about that, and it was originally like kind of a thing, as with every luxury, something that only royalty would really drink,
right?
And they used to like basically when they had like people in the court or whatever, they would just get a giant bowl and just throw tea leaves in there and like fill it with hot water, and then you just like ladle it out into a cup. And that was like the ancient tea culture. And then since then, obviously a really advanced and diverse tea culture has developed in China and then elsewhere later on. India has obviously quite a large tea culture. They are the largest tea exporters in the world currently. I think China's just behind them. They are surprisingly not the biggest, but I think India just goes for volume.
Yeah,
because most of the tea that we consume here is black tea that's like a blend of Ceylon and Assam tea.
I was just gonna say, the standard Ceylon and Assam.
Yeah,
and,
Ceylon is Sri Lanka, though, right? I think. Yeah, that was the colonial name for Sri Lanka.
Basically southern and northern.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the other famous Indian place, but anyway, yeah. So they go for volume there. There's just like an incredible amount of like different techniques and everything with tea. Just like different, because like people don't really realize this, but the tea that you drink is like cooked. It's not like
cooked and fermented.
Yeah, like if you get green tea, that's like fairly raw, but it's still they still steam it, so it's still cooked. The only thing that's completely raw is white tea,
right?
Which everybody knows that Lipton commercial with the old Chinese guy. Where they're like, what is white tea? He's like, white tea is a baby tea leaf, and when it's young,
right.
you pluck it.
And it's super straightforward. And you're like, cool, dude. Like, I just learned.
Yeah. I actually tried white tea for the first time after watching that commercial. And it's my shit. I'm really into pu'er tea right now, which is like a post-fermented tea, where they make black tea and then they pile it into like these giant piles and ferment it, and they like turn it, and it's weird that like it separates into different grades, like sort of on its own, because as they turn the pile, they get these like big nuggets. They're like the size of like a gumball,
right? And you buy them in like ounces.
Yeah, those kind of float to the top, I think, if I remember correctly, and then they have like really delicate leaves. Like, I'm trying to remember. They have like it's like a specific name for the grade, but it's like the top shelf shit.
Right.
And so like
really stuff.
Basically like they separate the pile out into like which leaves are good. They grade it like 1 through 9, and they have like loose leaf pu'er tea, which is they just take it out of the pile, dry it, and then throw it in a bag.
Gotcha.
And then they have like cake, like pressed cakes, which is
yeah,
what I
fake
like
tea,
to drink,
yeah.
where they take 357 grams, between 150 and 357 grams. They put it into this bag, and then they twist it really tight, and they tie a knot, and then they press it, and they like stack them up into piles.
Right.
And then those dry, and then people actually will keep those for like 30 years or more.
Wow.
To age them, because
right.
since they're post fermented, they can age.
Right. So it's kind of like wine.
Yeah.
Like traditional wine. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so there's some 30-year pours that are like probably like $500 a cake. Some of them are just crazy. The one I drink is like $15 a cake for 357 grams.
Shit, dude.
So that's like
how many servings?
You know, 20 cents a cup.
Yeah.
Well, I brew 12 grams in one.
Okay, so that's not too bad
for like a 150 milliliter teapot, and that gets me like probably like 8 cups.
How much is that for our North American listeners who are not Canadian? Imperial units. 150 milliliters.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know, like half a pound. I think it's half a pound.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, damn.
Yeah. 150 milliliters is about 4 ounces.
Yeah. So it's not bad for a teacup.
Yeah, and I like it because not only does it taste really good, it's like as dark and rich as coffee, pu'er tea is, but also it's made in a factory by workers, so I don't feel like I'm contributing to slavery nearly as much as I would by drinking like Indian tea or coffee.
Right. Yes.
Because coffee's full of slavery.
Yes.
It's not good.
It's like there's like
fuck Starbucks.
3 pounds of slavery per every pound of coffee. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like how we were saying, you should actually measure your fuel efficiency in miles per blood gallon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I guess the last thing I'll say about tea, since we're just talking about stimulants, is like for people who are like really into tea, there's this effect that they call, if you drink a lot of tea in one sitting, they call it tea drunkenness, and it's like a sort of mental state that's kinda like haze, more. It's not like hyper. It's more akin to being drunk.
Right. Yeah.
And like a lot of people have trouble describing it because it's not something that's
drunk.
It's kind of subtle. Yeah. Well, yeah. I can't say that I have for sure felt tea drunk before, but so many people swear that they have that I don't dispute its existence.
Yeah, I think because tea's got, I think we discussed this before, but tea's got like a couple other things in it that are like, unlike coffee, for example, where it has like simultaneously kind of like calming buzz.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of get that way. I feel like I've approached that level before, where I like drank like a couple pots of tea once and was just like, I feel kind of funny, but like I feel good,
right?
And you kind of come down after a while.
Yeah. For me, it's just hard because I'm usually on like 2 or 3 other substances at the same time. right. So it's like, well, I could be tea drunk, but I would have no way of knowing because I'm on kratom and other things.
Exactly. Yeah.
What was I gonna? Fuck. I had one other thing, but that's
all right.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. So I threw this in there. This is a fun little story about tea. Bodhidharma, or Daruma as he's known in Japan, was this like crazy, ugly, blue-eyed Indian founder of Chan/Zen Buddhism, according to the legends. And the story goes that Daruma attained enlightenment while he was meditating in a cave for like several years, and he was staring at the cave wall without blinking his eyes to like, I don't know fucking what, but he was doing this Buddhist shit.
That definitely happened.
Yeah, he definitely did. Yeah, definitely did that. And one day he fell asleep momentarily while he was meditating, and he got so pissed off that he fucking sliced his eyelids off, threw them on the ground, and then the legend goes that the eyelids grew into tea leaves, or like tea bushes, and that all tea leaves are now the descendants of the eyelids of Dharma.
So all that nice chachi that you get from tea,
right?
Is
You're like,
the power of Dharma.
Yeah. And my theory is that actually the real Dharma, because he was this big, crazy, bug-eyed like dude with like gigantic Indian European eyes. All these East Asians who saw him were like so freaked out by his unnatural lack of epicanthic folds and his habit of just staring at walls that they're like, dude, well, what if do you think he just cut his eyelids off? And then they're like, well, he drinks a lot of tea. And then I was thinking also
China's
that,
first
like,
Guilo.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I was like, as I was reading the story over again, I was like, cutting off your own eyelids does sound like the sort of thing you do if you were jacked up on stimulants.
Yeah.
So who knows?
What if he's just like the Chinese Oedipus?
Yeah, right. He's like, shit.
I guess you would want to do the opposite of cut. No, you wouldn't want to cut off your eyelids.
Eyes shut,
if
I
you,
guess.
Yeah,
the opposite of tea.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it can't be that. Well, anyway, so the next one is the other most familiar stimulant to us Westerners.
Yeah,
coffee. Do you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah. So coffee. Coffee has also a long history, although it was like less known and less cultivated until like the last, I want to say,
400 probably.
Yeah, well,
300.
Several hundred years or so. Yeah,
it was in Dances with Wolves. That's all I know.
Well, that's good. A little cultural reference there.
I wonder if that movie holds up.
I wonder too. I mean, it's been what that was like.
I used to watch the movie
90s?
in the aughts like all the time because it's on HBO like all the time.
So you're a Dances with Wolves stan?
Yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't stand for it now, not knowing like.
All right.
I bet if I watched it now, I'd be like, ooh, geez.
Yeah,
but
that's a lot of weird.
I mean, he was on the side of the Native Americans, which is better than 90% of movies about Native Americans.
I feel like Dances with Wolves is like lives in the same category as like The Last Samurai.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Like white hero joins the opposition and is good and is better.
Yeah.
And then they're like, you're so cool, you get to be our special boy.
Yeah.
And then
honestly though, the only thing I remember about The Last Samurai is like the scene where he first like gets to the place where he's staying and he's just like being an asshole and like screaming sake.
Right, because he's like going through withdrawal. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like, Jesus, man.
Yeah.
Chill the fuck out.
And then they're like, wow, this guy's a fucked up
You're a guest, man.
freak,
Don't be a dick.
Yeah, right. we allowed you to live, little shit.
I would never scream sake on the first day that I'm there.
Yeah, right. That's usually a date.
At least wait to the
second
third
date.
day.
Exactly. Yeah, so coffee, not sake. That's next episode maybe. Coffee was like this East African, berry bush thing, and these Oromo tribesmen who consumed it. They were hunters, and they'd go on.
The
for
Oromo
days.
they're like proto-Ethiopians, basically.
Yeah, or you could say that Ethiopia is a state that was constructed around the Oromo.
Right.
Either way.
That's probably more accurate.
Yeah, it was a house that was built around them without asking. So you had these hunters who'd go on like days and days and days of hunts, and they'd use the coffee plant or the coffee cherry or whatever to suppress hunger and obviously provide more energy and probably focus. So they're probably pretty good with a spear. And
yeah, I guess I never looked up like when people started roasting coffee berries.
Yeah, that was I think that was an Arabian contrivance.
Okay.
But it was a kind of, it wasn't immediate. So what happened for a while was that these coffee cherries would be plucked off the bush, and like initially like the actual Africans who like knew about them originally and just were like, oh yeah, these things grow here. It's like you have like, it's like in the States, it's like, oh look, wild blackberries, how fun. You know, and they're like, oh, these are good for hunting, and because you just pop some, and so they just like chew on them like.
My HOA had
berries.
the landscaping company mow down all of the blackberry bushes near my house.
My
I was so
God,
fucking
dude,
mad.
I hear shit like that, and I basically become a fucking.
But they don't have anyone pick up the fucking trash that's in the reservoir behind us. So like we have a big trash-filled reservoir. It's just fucking infuriating.
Fucking maniacs, man.
Why are you mowing down like wild plants and leaving plastic everywhere? What the fuck is your problem?
Right. Yeah. Some entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So. Anyway, so yeah. So these coffee cherries, blah blah blah. They're growing out there. The hunters love them, and then somehow
a little fun fact that I have because I worked in coffee for years. Everyone who's looked at a whole bean coffee bean knows that one side of it is flat, and the reason that is because they grow in pairs.
Yep.
And so they grow together, and like so the side that's flat is like the side that's in the middle.
Side, yeah.
But you can actually get ones that are grow it like as a single berry.
the pea berries.
It's called pea berry, and it's supposed to be a higher quality thing, but that might just be like one of those things where it's like, oh, it's rare, so
could
it's
be
better.
a placebo thing. Yeah, kind of like the
It's like the civet coffee.
Yeah, so that's actually demonstrably true, but it's like your taste may vary, you know.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an Indonesian thing, which is hilarious. But
I just remember a tweet from someone that was like, Indonesians are geniuses because they convinced Westerners to eat cat shit.
Basically, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they call it
and pay like $100 an ounce for it or whatever.
Yeah.
The fuck it is.
It's incredible. Yeah, they call it kopi luwak in Indonesia.
Okay.
After the civet. So this coffee eventually. So East Africa, like Somalia, Ethiopia, as we know them now. And a bunch of other areas along the east coast, the Horn, were really active in the Maritime Silk Road. They were kind of like that end of it. And as such, and also just regionally, they were really active traders with the Arabs, Persians, and everyone else that lived in that region.
Okay.
And so coffee, I think at some point it made its way across the water, and these like Arabs were just like really taken with it, for good reason, obviously.
Yeah.
And thank God for the Muslims, because they're like, this shit is amazing. Let's make it really even better. And so
you ever had Turkish coffee?
Oh yeah. All those like
variants
of like
your roommate has the nice Ibrik.
She knows how to make a particular variant of it. It's so good.
Yeah, I always get that when I go get shisha.
Oh yeah,
I always order a Turkish.
Hell yeah,
this shit is good. My mom hates it. She tried it once and she's like, it's just like coffee sludge. I was like, yeah, it rules.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's funny because a lot of the traditional ways of preparing coffee involve basically, like in the States we call it cowboy coffee because it's usually what these guys would do on the range out in the middle of nowhere with a kettle and a fire. Either just basically percolate it or they just boil it in a particular way.
Yeah.
But the traditional ways of preparing like roasted coffee as a beverage, roast and ground coffee as a beverage was very similar. It's just that they refined it and they would like spice it and all that. Less like Turkish coffee. And then Indonesian coffee is basically more like cowboy coffee. It's simpler. They just are like boiling it or simmering it in a pot. But they like to have the grit and the sludge in there because it like gives texture to the drink.
Yeah. It's like French press coffee is nice and textured.
Exactly. It's thicker. There's a heavier body.
Yeah.
And in their case, like sometimes they like to have some of the like the leftover grounds like from the brew like to chew on as they drink it. So they just kind of like savoring the that kind of bitter grounds.
Okay.
Which is like a them thing,
Yeah.
I never really liked grit, but I like the thickness.
Yeah. I like the amount of grit that makes it through a French press screen.
Yes, exactly. Right. It's just a little bit. Yeah. A little spice. So coffee. I know probably too much about the history of coffee, so I'll try to make it like a little shorter. But basically, coffee got into the Muslim world, Arab and Persian world, and they just took off with it. And keeping it kind of summarized, it got really popular, and it became a controversial habit and a controversial drug for the lack of a better term, and it was partly because in Islam you're not supposed to become intoxicated, right? And so they were like, all right, alcohol is out. They don't drink. They do, but they're not supposed to.
Right.
And the stricter Muslims really don't drink. They're kind of like Mormons or JWs or something like that. And we're a lot of like the conservative Protestants in the States or something.
JWs, Jews.
Right. Jehovah's Witnesses. Sorry. So
it's a weird way to spell it, but okay.
Right. Just cutting out that vowel.
I guess that is what they did,
Right. Yeah. Hebrew. So these.
So it was banned several times in.
It was banned several times. Right? It was partly because of. Let's not say it was under Sharia law. It was more that it was
specific guys,
local decrees from imams or sultans or other like leaders who were saying, "Look, this is getting people quote unquote drunk." Yeah. Because it looked like people were getting wound up. They were getting wound up.
Yeah.
And so it to them resembled the effects of like say alcohol, and they were like concerned about like the effects on behavior and society and everything like that. And they're like, it was to them like the parallel to our kind of crack epidemic bullshit, where they're like, oh my god, everybody's like running around in the street, like becoming violent and groping women and shit like that,
flipping cars over,
right? Flipping cars over. What are we gonna do? Dare to say no to coffee, and so. And these imams would have these rulings on it, and all this sort of thing, and
I know that like one of the first ones was overturned like as soon as the guy died.
Yeah, they're like, "Fuck this guy."
They're like, "Nah, we like this shit."
Yeah, this is good shit. And a couple of other reasons that coffee was banned or restricted was because, and this has been in effect ever since. Coffee has a tendency, for some reason, coffee has a tendency to be just strong enough, like to get you hyper enough to start arguing about politics, but not so nuts that it's like you're a crackhead.
Yeah.
Running around raving about everything.
Right.
It's like just strong enough to get you agitated about the political situation and to start getting extremely literate.
Yeah.
And so everyone would gather in these coffee houses and they'd like have this delicious brew and they'd get amped and they'd start talking. And also, like, I don't know the extent to which this was true in the Arab or Muslim world, but it was definitely true in, say, Europe later. But classes would mingle.
Yeah.
Right? So that was another thing where, like, oh shit, my hierarchy,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so people would they'd get agitated, they'd realize that there was commonalities, and they'd start sharing information, they'd start beefing, they'd whatever.
Yeah.
And at the same time, of course, the imams are like, this is intoxication, this is bad, And so eventually, it would get banned, and then it would get, like, the ban would get lifted, all this kind of thing.
And now somehow that's totally been neutered by Starbucks.
So right, it's really interesting. So eventually they
I'm wondering why that is, but maybe it's because of the whole like faux like community outreach activism shit that Starbucks does. I don't know how much time you spent in Starbucks. I've spent more than a lifetime's worth of time there because my roommate worked there and I was his ride to and from work. Yeah. And so like I would just go, I would drop him off. I would hang out in the shopping center there like the whole time that he was working. So I would like sit in Starbucks for like 4 hours, like doing like schoolwork and shit. And then I would like go to the bar and drink for a couple hours and then come back and hang out at the Starbucks again. Yeah. So like I know way too much about Starbucks. Yeah. So they have like all of that, like anytime anyone thinks about like, oh, I wonder if anything bad, like political, is happening. You look around and they're like, oh, we're doing this for the community. Like, look at this. Right. We're so good.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. We can like touch on that real quick. What I've noticed is that, oh yeah, cops outside again. Yep. I don't know what that's about, but
someone got pulled over.
Yeah, there's cops around here a lot, but
yeah,
they're probably just collecting tips. But yeah, so the thing about that I've noticed about coffee shops, coffee houses, and stuff like that, coffee stores, is that your traditional models of coffee houses and coffee shops, which basically comes all the way from like the Islamic, gather in one place, have a bunch of coffee model, but like has been kind of variated over time and in places. That is almost always a place for nerds and intellectuals and activists and like random other kinds of dorks to gather, share information, play games, read, maybe argue, etc.
Yeah.
And they're a lot more like pubs and dive bars that way.
Yeah.
Where it's usually a chill environment where people go to like lounge, they have a coffee, they have 2 coffees, they have a snack, they may have 3 coffees, they might have some tea, whatever. But these are people who are usually interested in, at least superficially interested in, exchanging ideas or being part of something.
Right.
That's what I've noticed. That's the constituency. And then you've got your kind of diner model. Right, where it's like, oh yeah, I might go in for a cup of coffee, but I'll probably have a meal. Maybe I'll bring my family, and those are kind of just community centers.
Yeah,
right. And then you have, or like cafeteria center kind of places, And then you have the corporate coffee chain, and those places are just sterile. Right. Like you might read there, you might bring your fucking book club there, or your like student project, but you're really not doing much else.
Yeah.
You go,
and I guess they do appeal mainly to.
Yeah,
like bourgeois liberals.
Exactly right. Yeah. It's very, very like clean and sterile and like the kind of hyper modern, squared off look. And I mean,
you could probably build more class consciousness at Dunkin' Donuts than Starbucks.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Dunkin' Donuts is like an establishment for the working class, and cops, unfortunately, but
true, yeah,
sure, but like
that's the other thing. Really, is like coffee shops are always real friendly with the cops, real friendly.
Yeah,
like I have never worked at a coffee shop where they didn't have like an unwritten policy of like give cops coffee for free.
Right, yeah, and I think that's going to be more common probably at the corporate types of chains.
And especially at Starbucks, like a lot of homeless people come and hang out at Starbucks because they often, not always, often have freely accessible bathrooms. So they'll go use the bathrooms either like for legit reasons or for still legit reasons to do drugs.
Right.
But a lot of times, they'll like be really strung out or drunk or whatever, and like somebody will call the cops to like carry him out.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something I've noticed at just about every coffee shop.
I fortunately never had to do that.
Neither did I.
I mean, one of the places I worked at was like one of the bougiest coffee shops like in the area. It was that place in Delray, the bakery.
Oh right, you mentioned
that.
So
I never even saw a homeless person try to come inside. There was definitely some crazy guys that came inside.
Oh yeah.
There's this one guy, Brian, who like he would always be wearing like a fucking like a neon green like fishnet top with nothing under it and like bike shorts.
Nice. Just getting
and
out.
he acted like he had been doing acid since the 60s nonstop.
Damn.
He ruled. But anyway.
Yeah, one of my coworkers at the location in Denver that I ended up at, the Starbucks location. It was a real quiet spot, but like and so I actually personally never had to deal with like the crazies and like the junkies and stuff. But one of my coworkers there, who was like a shift supervisor, he told me, he was like, yeah, there was this one time I went in the bathroom after some guy went in and left, and I was like, oh no, this is gonna be a mess. And he's like, and he went in, and at first he was like pleasantly surprised, like, oh, there's nothing there. And then he said he looked down and there was just like a sock lying on the ground, and he like had his like his sanitary gloves on.
Yeah.
So he's like, oh god, and he like goes picks up the sock by like the edge of it and realizes that the guy had shit inside the sock and just thrown it on the ground.
Oh man, well at least he didn't shit all over the walls, I guess.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like I've heard stories like that too. So presumably whatever stimulants this guy was on, he was focused.
Yeah.
He was focused and he had a sniper's precision. So So coffee.
One last thing I will say is there was this guy that always hung out at my roommate's Starbucks. We just called him Smoking Guy,
right?
And we never really got the full story on him because he was like completely nonverbal.
Oh wow.
Well, he could say like cigarette sort of, and he lived like in the neighborhood right nearby that I used to live in. The one Springfield, Virginia, where like there's this neighborhood where MS-13 was like doing like sex trafficking type stuff. And I lived there at the time. And so Smoking Guy would just come and sit out in front of the store and just chain smoke nonstop.
Yeah.
And obviously like he didn't, I don't think he had a job. Well, obviously he didn't have a job because he was at the fucking coffee shop all day.
Right, yeah.
But like, so he completely smoked either cigarettes that my roommate would give him or like random people would give him, or he would just pick butts off the ground and like refry them and smoke those.
Jesus. Yeah.
And so it was sad because like the little bit that we found out about him was like he used to be normal and then like his wife died and it traumatized him so much that he like became that. So
that sucks.
It's wild like the people you meet even at those like sanitized corporate places.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, it's the like people come in, real people, and that's what still makes the difference. But
there was a guy that came in all the time who was like this like weird creepy like magic trick guy who like he did balloon animals and he always it was so funny because like you're like, oh, balloon animals, he's probably good with kids, right? No,
Oh,
Not
no.
even fucking close.
Oh,
He was terrible with kids. He wore a Slipknot shirt every single day.
He
Different
just
Slipknot
wanted
shirt
to do balloon animals.
every single day. And
So he's more like a carny.
he creeped the kids out, and he would always like try to make balloon hats and shit, and like dogs for like girls that he was trying to hit on. They were often way too young for him.
Right. Yep.
And he had to get kicked out a couple times.
Oh.
So,
yeah.
So yeah, some real weirdos go to Starbucks.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, Starbucks is. I mean, it takes all kinds, I guess. All right. So one of the interesting things about coffee in the Muslim world, the early Muslim world. Well, at that point it wasn't that early, but the early coffee, blah blah blah. Is that the Sufis, who were these, this mystical sort of sect or substrate of Islam, they got really into like the spiritual connection to God and all this stuff, and so they actually would use coffee as an aid to concentration and a kind of spiritual intoxication or like oneness, as they chanted and prayed. And also when they were on Hajj, they would carry these kind of like, they were like energy bars with coffee packed into them. And I think it was like, as I recall, it was like dried fruit, honey.
Oh,
stuff
you know
like
what?
that,
I saw
coffee cherries in it.
I saw a video about
cool.
this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was, I don't remember what the whole theme was, but it was like one of those like YouTube food channels, and they were trying these different things, and they basically like they took ground up coffee and like I think it was butter.
Oh yeah, butter. Yeah. They put butter
and
in it,
they put it. They like wrap it up and they put it in their shirt, and like your body heat is supposed to like melt it all together and like make it into
that's how they did it,
like an energy bar.
Yeah.
And the guy who tried it was like, "This is actually really good. Like I would totally make this again." And I don't know if I would use my body heat again because that's kind of weird, but this shit is good. It was like the only thing in the whole video that anyone was like, "Yeah, this is great. I like it. I would eat it again."
Nice.
Everything else was like, "This sucks. I would never eat this again."
That sounds like worth trying.
Yeah.
So they would basically just like pop these like energy balls.
Yeah.
And like buzz on the caffeine as they like pilgrimaged and prayed and meditated and whatnot. So like we said, coffee was kind of controversial in the Islamic world, and it got banned, and then the ban was lifted several times in different places. But it became really popular eventually, and then it was just like there was no going back after that.
Yeah.
They just were like, yeah, fine, it's great.
Yeah.
We all love it. And I think it was partly that, like, say, for example, sultans or whoever like realized that they could turn it to their advantage, maybe in trade, and just like get popularity by being like, "Hey, we love coffee," like, it's great, which is kind of like how I think certain politicians are acting about weed these days.
Oh, definitely, most definitely.
It's like they're just taking that wave,
I bet there was some imam that like criminalized coffee, and then as soon as he got out of office, he opened up his own coffee shop.
Exactly. He was like, "Ha,
Everyone was like, you fucking dickhead."
Yeah, right.
Do you know how many people were? I don't know enough
rolling in the camels,
Islam words to make an equivalent of this.
Yeah.
What's that word for like a fatwa?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you know how many people you called a fatwa because of drinking coffee?
And then how it got to Europe was kind of hilarious. This was basically by the, I think, 1500s ish, but basically there was like a European who I think he was Austrian or something, some equivalent of that, and he heard that a bunch of these Europeans, they were at war with the Turks and stuff, because that's just kind of what you did.
Still what you do.
Yeah, basically, right? It's like, not really going away.
Well, the Turks still exist.
Yeah.
Time to go to war with them.
Right.
Got to solve that problem.
Let's do this. Yeah. So they'd captured a bunch of ships in the Mediterranean. I think, some Italians or something had captured a bunch of like Turkish ships, and they found these like crates and crates and crates of these fucking beans in the holds, and they're like, "What the fuck is this?"
Yeah.
And this guy up in like Vienna or whatever, he heard about it, and he was like, "Holy shit." And he like rushed down. He's like,
"Yo, let me get some of them beans.
Give me them beans, yeah. Give me that shit." And they're like, "Dude, you can have it." And he's like, "Oh my god!" And like, so he opened.
Oh wait, sorry, I gotta do the accent. Yo, let me get some of those beans.
Ich gerne some beans. and so he like opened his coffee house, and that, as I recall, was the first and oldest European coffee house, where he like roasted up the beans and started brewing that shit.
So he took it back to Vienna?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then he opened it up, blah 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 blah, and kind of made a European knockoff of these like I guess Turkish style coffee houses. And what he also did was he created what we now recognize as like the traditional coffee shop or cafe, which is he put out racks of their like old-timey newspapers and pamphlets and shit like that.
Okay.
And it became a place where all these different kinds of philosophers, political thinkers, and dissidents and everything else would come by and like do exactly what we do now, which is they'd pin up their shit.
Yeah.
They'd put down like their new fucking manifesto or their screed or whatever they'd just worked up and put out on a printing press, which was also like super popular then. And so the coffee house was basically the proto-internet.
Okay.
Like immediately.
Yeah.
And then it spread throughout. It became very popular in like England, for example, and then coffee houses became one of the incubation sites for early like financial capitalism.
Okay.
So that like Lloyd's Bank used to be Lloyd's Coffee House.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And underwriting as a term and also as a practice evolved from they'd have these chalkboards in the back of the English coffee houses where these like merchants and stuff would go back and they'd write the name of their ship that was venturing out, venture capitalism.
Yeah.
And they would write the name of the ship. And they'd say, like, this is how much we need to fund.
Yeah.
And who wants to underwrite their name and the bid they want to fund with.
I see.
So then the people would be like, oh, and this was actually one reason why, like, capitalist finance has been seen as, like, oh, it's a great way for everybody to, like, win a little bit. Because the coffee houses were a kind of a full, like, multi-class zone where anybody could go and be like, I have a pound or I have 300 guineas or whatever the fuck you've got.
Yeah.
And be like, I'm going to put that down on this venture. And then I'll get back whatever comes back.
Okay.
Right? In shares. Right?
Yeah.
So the Dutch and the English basically figured that out.
As we covered in an earlier episode, that's where the LLC evolved from.
Yep.
Was these ventures, somebody would form a company for the venture, and they would go on one voyage and then come back with the whatever spoils they got, and then the company would be liquidated.
Yep.
and so somebody realized eventually, like, why don't we form a permanent entity, and then eventually it turned into like limited liability, where you only lose as much as you invest, whereas before that, if the venture went into debt, then you would be liable for the debt.
Exactly. And so it's interesting that coffee houses in particular became these social sites. What theorists or historians have called like the third place. Yeah. Which is, it's not the home and it's not the workplace. It's kind of a commons.
Okay.
Of sorts, but of course it's an enclosure too. So that's where you get I think the difference between like the chain style environment, which is an enclosure, and like the traditional style, which is an attempt at a commons where you just buy and sell and lounge.
It kind of, what another thing is with the corporate chains. I mean, they're all U.S. originated companies.
As I understand it, yeah.
And I mean, I don't think the U.S. really had a coffee culture prior to like the 70s, other than like people just
not the way we know
getting
it now.
Shitty coffee from the store or at home or whatever.
Yeah, so this gets into like coffee economics and coffee culture and history, but like, so of course, kind of like with like weed having indica and sativa, except
there's Arabica and
Robusta, yeah. Except that the funny thing is that like it's a really rough analogy, because like with weed you're like, oh yeah, like indica's cool and sativa's cool, you just kind of get different highs,
right?
And like there's all sorts of other dimensions with coffee. It's like Arabica is like the OG coffee, and it's like refined and relatively mellow, but it's delicate, it's hard to grow and hard to get right, and you got to treat it right, and then Robusta was like a strain that was grown that was robust, but it's also like there's way more caffeine and it's just harsher, so it's kind of like the like basement meth of coffee.
I think really cheap coffee that you buy in the store is like a mix of the two.
Yeah, I think like
if you get like decent coffee, it's going to be completely Arabica.
Right. And then like Maxwell House or Folgers or something, bottom shelf
Yeah.
stuff is going to be, it might be like a blend
Yeah.
of the two, or
Yeah.
it might even be, I think, 100% Robusta.
Yeah, I think the proper analogy would be it's weed versus dirt weed.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. And so, what were we going on with that? The
economics of coffee and
Right.
how it pertains to the U.S.
Yeah, so the U.S. used to be, I think...
'Cause I think part of the reason, I guess
Mostly
coffee did become
Robusta.
popular in the U.S. because we were trying to create a separate national identity from the English, and the English were all about tea.
Tea, right.
And I think the U.S. tried to steer away from tea drinking after the
Yeah.
Revolution.
Yeah. Coffee is, as I recall, coffee is the drink of the Scots and the Americans.
Okay.
And I think a few others. And of course, like the Mediterranean cultures. And so, yeah, like Americans, like most of like American domestic products, like, fucking hooch, fucking coffee,
Yeah.
all this shit, or like anything they imported.
We do
for
have a long
use.
history of drinking swill, I guess.
It's just swill. Yeah, it's just always been swill.
Yeah.
And then we started to try to do better in like the 20th century, kind of. And then, so like in the, I think it was 20s and 30s, there was whichever, I forget what it's called, but like this this kind of like coffee industrial association.
Okay.
Was trying to like do it. There was like a union side where they fought for the right of workers to have coffee breaks.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Right
so
on.
it was actually a kind of a win-win,
Yeah.
and that's where we get the coffee break
Okay.
as an institution, which is cool. But now we don't get breaks again. Anyway, so cool. We have to make our breaks. But the coffee break as an idea came from whatever this fucking association was called, saying, hey, like they would like petition and lobby and pressure these companies, like, like everybody's got to have a cup of coffee during the day. Like, let them have 15 minutes, you know, to like have a cup of coffee. The fucking Brits are doing it with tea at their factories,
Right.
you might as well, And then they're like, oh, fine, And then of course that also drove up sales.
Uh-huh.
And there was all sorts of weird like, market ups and downs and crashes and price fixing and weird shit. Like, so the financial market side of coffee history is also very interesting and scandalous. There was a whole thing, I think, with Brazil where there was like, I think, dumping. But anyway, this is getting beside the point. You guys, if you want to learn more about this stuff,
this is
coffee
not a
has some
podcast
weird
about
drama.
political economy or anything like that, so
Yeah,
we don't
well,
want to talk about that bullshit.
Fair. But yeah, if you want to get really into the weeds with like the history of coffee,
we could
there's
do a
a
whole
lot,
episode on
there's
coffee.
a lot of drama. Yeah. And so then, it was like in the mid-century and after that, like Americans in particular started to go like wise up and be like, oh, like what if we just drank this Arabica stuff? What if we learned the Italian style?
Yeah.
And of course, like how it is with like market-based.
Supposedly,
Adoption.
Pete's is the one that like brought that coffee culture to the U.S. Really,
Pizza?
Pete's,
Oh, Pete's.
Yeah.
Yes.
according to them.
Yeah, well, according to that.
So I don't
yeah.
know if that's actually true or if
I can't remember
history
if
is
they
written by the
really
victors,
were
but
behind it. Yeah. But
but
I mean,
Starbucks
I like their
definitely
coffee.
came way after them, but they just expanded most aggressively.
Yeah,
You know what's
exactly.
weird? Like I know that you remember this because everyone fucking does, except for like real dumbasses. But like in the like late 90s and early 2000s, Starbucks was expanding so aggressively they would have Starbucks across the street from each other,
Yeah.
and they basically like
they
surrounded all the
compete
local
with
coffee
each other.
shops
Yep.
to force them to close.
Yeah, exactly.
I tried to look up articles about this
Yeah.
because there was some dude who was like, that never happened. I was like, what the
What?
fuck are you talking about?
were all over
I
the
went to
place.
look for articles about it. Nothing. You can't find
Wow.
anything about that.
Wow.
It's
That's
crazy.
so weird because I remember, and like you can ask.
There's
anybody.
a Lewis Black joke about
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So it was obviously happening.
Yeah, and it really was happening. Like you said, I mean, it was basically like the stationary retail store version of like a fucking gangbang.
Yeah.
Like they just group around
Yeah.
these sites, and then like the store that had the best sales,
Coffee
I think, would
Bukkoffee.
stay. Yeah, basically, or if fucking, yeah, whatever.
Bukkoffee.
Bukkoffee, exactly, yeah. Bukkoffee. There's the episode title.
Yeah.
But yeah, they would basically they would surround it, they'd choke out the one that was already there, or the ones that were already there, and then as I recall, like the Starbucks location that made the best sales
Yeah.
would then kind of take all.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. I mean, like from a fucking evil market scheme
Right.
side, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's pure like minesweeper competition.
Yeah, it's another one of those things that like Marxism doesn't quite get, where Marxism focuses on the capitalists making profits. Whereas in this case, the capitalist is focusing on grabbing as much market share as possible,
exactly. They're
so
going
that they can get a
feudal
guaranteed
with it,
revenue
basically.
stream,
Exactly,
because they are the only game in town.
Right. Yes, I think that yeah, like that's one of the like the rigidities of like at least orthodox Marxist viewpoints, which is
everyone of course will insist like, oh no, Marx totally said that.
Right, exactly.
If you read it this way, then he actually predicted Starbucks doing that exactly. He said like in the year 1997, Starbucks is going to open 200 stores.
Right.
If you read that, it's on page 700 of Capital Volume 1.
Right. Kind of like the Grubstakers episode. He's like, well, you mentioned use value, you know. But
yes.
It says right here.
Shout out Andy.
Yeah, Andy, nice work. But also. The focus on like the production and like the kind of the legal apparatus that surrounds production and manufacturing, it's like did really well with describing how that was working at the time and how it might work within those kind of parameters and all that kind of stuff, and how that exploitation specifically works. But like what we're kind of touching on here, is the exploitation within those zones is not the only exploitation that's happening. There's a lot of exploitation that is kind of happening in that gray area where they're just permitted to act like fucking like warlords.
Yeah.
You know, and just like I said, like gangbang the other coffee shop out of existence. Yeah. You know, just to keep using that word over and over again.
That great word that we all love.
That we all love. Yeah. Yang gang. Gang bang. But essentially, yeah, Starbucks is creepy as fuck. It's not that good.
Wait, so are the guys called a bang gang?
I guess
I never thought about that.
I guess so. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Or are they gangbangers? Because that word is already kind of taken.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and I think that like
totally different meaning.
Is it though? I mean, it's kind of because I think that like now we're getting into fucking
so Starbucks is sexing
semantics of like
the employees of the local coffee shop.
Jesus, yeah, basically, right. I think it comes from the fact that like in many of these group assaults, rape would happen. Oh, you know, and also like
I thought it was just a fun little rhyme.
I think partly because it's a rhyme, and so it's like conveniently usable for really anything that happens to include violence by a group, like Nazis. Yeah. So anyway, speaking of Nazis, Howard Schultz. But
yes.
Yeah.
Damn, I didn't even think about that. The connection to the current Democratic primary. Yeah, dude, I actually like wrote a pamphlet that I put into my roommate's Starbucks about Howard Schultz and how he makes the same amount in 1 hour that his employees make in like 10 months.
Yeah, it's fucking ridiculous.
He was in 2012 or 2013. He was making like $16,000 an hour.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
and it's like
my roommate was making probably like $26,000 a year.
Right.
Just insane numbers.
It reminds me of the way that they put it. So Proles of the Round Table, which I occasionally listen to, they were talking about like how China is, I think by now has already introduced a cap on executive pay relative to the lowest paid worker, which is cool. It's like China's got all this other bullshit going on, but like at least that's cool. And I think that
whole falling out of your car thing, that sucks.
Right, yeah. But this whole like,
we have Instagram, so we can't really say shit about that.
Right, exactly. And like
just the entire platform of Instagram. It's enough wealth flaunting for the eternity, basically.
Pretty much. And one of the guys on Proles of the Round Table was like, oh yeah, I love how in the States, it's considered perfectly reasonable for the executive to be making like 300 times at minimum what the lowest paid worker is making, whereas in China they're like, I don't know, 12 times is kind of pushing it, you know? And then he said, but of course here they'd just be like, no, you're greedy for not wanting them to make more, like what the fuck is wrong with this shit? So yeah, Howard Schultz could have fucking die in a fire.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
Getting jizzed on by like, I don't know, like
everyone
breaking espresso machines, just boiling over and spraying on him. Cool. So coffee is great. There's a lot more to talk about that. Either we can do an episode on in full, or you
one
can
thing you
just
made me think of just now is
there's a bunch of books about it.
Yeah, I've been playing this game not lately. Lately, I've been playing Warframe, which is very fun. There's some new updates that have made the game a lot better. But anyway, I've been playing this game, Oxygen Not Included, which is like this game where you create like a space colony. It's like a space colony survival type game.
Okay.
It's really fun. And like they have like a tech tree, just like in like Civilization or whatever kind of game like
Gotta
that.
have a tech tree.
And at the end of the plumbing tree is espresso machines.
Hell yes.
So they call it advanced plumbing, and you get an espresso machine. I was like, damn, I never thought of that as advanced plumbing, but it really is.
Yeah, because you got like a bunch of piping and
tubes
water intake
and boilers
and,
and stuff.
everything. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's basically like unless they were to recategorize it as quote unquote white goods or appliances, like fridges and stuff, but it's not really like that because it's got so much like intake output stuff.
And just like to cement how connected I am to coffee, I actually have a chronic wrist injury from working in a coffee shop
from
using a doser grinder. If you don't know what that is, so like for the like semi-automatic machines where somebody like fills the like little the group head. It's not the group head. I can't remember what all the parts are called now. But anyway, you fill the little thing with coffee, you tamp it down, and then you turn it into the group head, and then you turn on the machine. So the grinding step for most grinders, it just grinds coffee and spits it as it grinds. But a doser grinder, it has like this chamber that it spits it into, and then you pull this little lever, and it meters out like a set amount of coffee. So you dose it like 3 times, and then that's like supposed to be the amount that you use. It's supposed to make it like more consistent. But in practice, you're working so fast that you don't wait for the whole chamber to fill, and so like it doesn't work that way. But what it does do is give you massive repetitive stress injury. So I've had tendonitis in my wrist ever since I worked there. To the point where like sometimes it'll get so bad I can't even like pick up a glass of water without it hurting.
Jeez, dude.
Yeah.
You got to cut that hand right off.
Yeah.
Just
I'm waiting for my prosthetic arm that Silicon Valley promised me.
That's
Silicon Valley and Ghost in the Shell. They promised me prosthetic body parts.
I mean, this is the tech utopia we're waiting for. You know, Elon Musk is going to save us from tendonitis.
Exactly.
Right after he gets that submarine out.
I had it flare up a couple weeks ago.
Jesus,
but it's better now. Last episode we recorded, I was wearing my wrist brace, but it's good now. So,
well, good.
Yeah.
I was about to flare up, is what you're saying.
I was cooking with the wok and filled it up with too much stuff. It was like lifting it up one-handed. And that just destroyed it. But anyway,
injuries.
Let's take a break before we get to the next section.
Let's do it.